Well met, lords and ladies, Jacob Barlow speaking. I bet you weren't expecting one of these too soon. Well, it turns out that apart from the Stephen Fry visit, we also got a visit today from Gary Barlow. Now, Gary Barlow, because I mention his name sometimes and people don't necessarily know because, difference in places, he is a musician, singer, songwriter, composer, and he was also a member of one of the most successful boy bands to come out of Britain, Take That. This may seem redundant to some people talking about this, but I just wanted to specify just to make sure. So, Gary Barlow was quite a different speaker to Stephen Fry, actually. Equally useful, of course, but he seemed to have more conflicting answers between each other, which was pointed out to him, actually. There's a lot of references, actually, to his book, in particular, which also got a bit from Stephen Fry, but not so much, because this book is more of an autobiography, so a lot of stuff was drawn out from there. Gary Barlow himself did also talk about his origin in a lot more detail. So going into his formation years from the ages of 11 to 19, basically writing music on his own, getting some performance experience from different places like playing in bars, having some neighbors come along and listen to what he was doing. This isn't any particular order, by the way. Performing as a backing musician for certain acts like Ken Dodd, for example, in different variety shows, and just going into details about that and how he gained experience. So by the time that he joined Take That at 19, he already had quite the experience studying audience reactions and what actually works in terms of his process of songwriting and of performing. So as you can imagine, it was quite refreshing to see even from a musical perspective, because this wasn't geared towards acting students such as myself. It was geared towards the music students, sorry. But we got tickets anyway because we got second priority, but we got in. So why not? So it's refreshing to see from that point of view how much he actually shows signs of understanding and of coordinating with other disciplines. I didn't know that he'd worked in musicals himself, so he had composed a few things for other musicals, had some of his music switched around and some of his lyrics, and also had seen the process himself and is actually working on a film, which is mostly music, but of course combines all these several disciplines, which works very well for where I am right now. I'm not going to mention the name of the place, once again for the exact same reasons highlighted in the last video. But in the end, even though it was very refreshing to see, what was great was the fact that even though some questions were supposed to be highlighted and set beforehand to ask him, we still got the chance to actually raise our hands and ask questions ourselves. Which actually benefited me quite a lot, because actually for once I was sat in a general area where my hand could be seen if I were to go up and ask a question. So that is exactly what I did. My question was about his views on writing songs from other people's perspectives, because I recently formed a collaboration with a music student who actually was right next to me in the lecture hall, coincidentally. So when he talked about the writing in groups were being more difficult, we just turned to each other and went. Anyway, that point aside, so I've written songs from her perspective and some from, a broader scale, and nothing really from mine as of yet with her. We'll get to that later. In any case, that was my question, to see what he thought, because he talked beforehand about how his songwriting process, he says his best music comes from his personal standpoint, which he kind of refreshed because he said things like, in response to my question, he said that he'll take inspiration from anywhere, be it a book passage, a bit of passing conversation with someone around a dinner table, or just go, oh, I need to write that in a song. Which actually is something that I actually do myself a few times. Not so much quoting other people, but maybe a couple of book passages here and there, and so some lines of poetry on their own. I've done that in the past. So yes, actually, a lot of the things resonated with me. Not so much in the way that, there was the pen dropping moments that Stephen Fry had, where without even knowing he was talking to me, he was talking to me. But even so, it was still nice to see that that's this part that I'd essentially cultivated by myself. Clearly, still has the same potential to actually, to flourish and develop. Now, obviously, the difference is that I am not actually skilled in any form of music. I used to play the guitar, and in fact, actually, ironically enough, I too wrote a few songs at the age of 11 to actually and performed a couple of them, in particular at this one event at the end of my primary school. But I dropped the guitar years ago and haven't really touched the area of music since. And since then, my skills at reading music, while not disappeared completely, have diminished. And he says that lyrics are the most difficult part. But also, that's the point that he started out with every time he was writing with Take That, and then would go into the music. Then contradicting himself when he mentioned that one album he did try composing a bunch of instrumentals first, and then showing them to the group, and then they made the album essentially in 1 hour. But 3/4 of it anyway, just by sharing around these different ideas. Obviously, it then got refined later. He didn't mention what album this actually was, but that's beside the point. So I guess essentially just different avenues of musical exploration. He knows about the DNA of music, having performed several covers and things, and he knows kind of what the audience will want to actually hear, but also how to put his heart into what he's presenting. So it doesn't feel like it's like anything that he does is corporate. I can verify this because I've heard his music on the radio, and I can tell that it comes from a heartfelt place. There's some artists that you can't say this for. There's some people like Ed Sheeran where you can see that 50% of his lyrics are heartfelt and 50% are corporate. And versus several mumble rappers that 100% of their lyrics are completely corporate and entirely formulaic. Now, Gary Barlow himself would say that I shouldn't be criticizing other people in the creative industry. This is a point of his that I disagreed with. I think that just because something comes from a heartfelt place, if you're putting it out to the public, then you should be prepared for how they actually receive it. Obviously, they shouldn't, berate you and belittle you if what you've done comes from that position. But even so, I think that, without criticism, how are we supposed to learn and how to improve? That's why I myself do it so very often. And I'm in an environment where I'm receiving criticism all the time. And that's really helping me understand myself better and how better to present myself. But apart from that, I'll just say that in general, while I went in not being that much of a fan of Gary Barlow, not knowing that much about him and not really following him that closely, I would say that I am definitely 100-fold more of a fan of his now than I was before. It's interesting because there's people like my old drama teacher back in secondary school who actually cried when Robbie Williams left Take That. And And yet now I'm seeing, just the individual person that doesn't, not Robbie Williams, obviously Gary Barlow we're talking about here, but individual person from that same band who has obviously very much flourished on his own and isn't considered as much of a star as Robbie Williams, quite unfortunately. Clearly, deserves to be where he is, clearly has the proper work ethic, and clearly has there's everything to say and all of the different methods in which to say them. So, all I can conclude by saying is, Gary Barlow, thank you, and it was nice to have a conversation with you. And to everyone else, until next time, farewell.